1.5 hours. That was the duration of his delay, until the CEO entered and altered everything. The glass doors of Highland Crest Bank opened, allowing a rush of cold, conditioned air to spill onto the sidewalk. The atmosphere of quiet efficiency was established by the subtle polish of leather furniture and the sharp fragrance of freshly brewed coffee. Dorian Bennett entered the building, tucking his shoulders beneath his tailored blazer. He was not anxious. He was confident in his ability to acquire a seat in any room, having entered numerous boardrooms, signed numerous deals, and constructed numerous projects from the ground up. He merely required them to observe it. His appointment was scheduled for 11 a.m. sharp. There is no reason to anticipate anything other than professionalism. Mahogany desks, sleek glass partitions, and gold accents that caught the light just enough to remind you that money dwelt here were a careful blend of contemporary luxury and old-world wealth in the bank's lobby. It was a location that was intended to awe. As he approached, the receptionist, a woman with a neatly pinned bun and an air of disinterest, cast a gaze at him. Melissa was the name that appeared on her nameplate. She greeted the audience with a clipped and mechanical voice, "Welcome to Highland Crest Bank. Do you have an appointment?" "Dorian Bennett," he declared, depositing his leather portfolio on the counter. "I have a meeting with Linda Kramer at 11. Melissa glanced at the screen as she typed at her keyboard. In a neutral tone of voice, she stated, "You are on the schedule. You are welcome to take a seat. She will be with you in the near future." Dorian stepped back towards the seating area, nodding. He selected a chair in close proximity to the floor-to-ceiling windows, where the polished floors were illuminated by sunlight that fell in clean, inclined patterns. The telephones were flanked by a group of sharply dressed professionals who engaged in casual conversation regarding market shifts and investing opportunities. This was the type of conversation that one would hear when individuals were at ease and felt at home. His briefcase was lightly tapped by his fingertips. 10 a.m. he arrived ahead of schedule. He has consistently been. The minutes passed by. 11:05. 11:15. Initially, he relinquished the matter. Delays did not exclude banks. However, after 20 minutes, he began to observe the movement of individuals with greater attention. Melissa was approached by a man in a gray suit, who appeared to be in his early 30s. A youthful banker appeared less than 5 minutes later and guided him past the frosted glass doors that led to the executive offices. This was followed by the arrival of a woman in a cream-colored blazer. According to Dorian, there was no appointment. Melissa was also led inside after engaging in a casual, pleasant conversation. His name had yet to be invoked. He reviewed his timepiece once more. 11:30 a.m. Something was amiss. Dorian's fingers gently tapped against his briefcase as he observed individuals enter and exit. Some individuals entered with the assurance of belonging, exhibiting easy smiles, familiar gestures, and handshakes with the staff. Like him, others waited patiently for their turn. What is the distinction? They were summoned. He was not. He had been present for 35 minutes. His appointment had been scheduled. He had verified it on 2 separate occasions. Nevertheless, he remained seated in the same chair, despite the fact that at least 6 other individuals had entered the building after him and vanished through the opaque glass doors that led to the executive offices. Nevertheless, he maintained his composure. In the past, he had encountered similar obstacles, subtle, unspoken barriers. The type of individuals who could effortlessly refute it. "Oh, we didn't mean to keep you waiting. It must have been a scheduling mix-up. So sorry about that. You know how busy we get." Excuses that are concealed within the veneer of courtesy. He stood, maintaining a neutral expression, and proceeded to return to the front desk. Melissa raised her head, maintaining the identical expression of resignation. "I apologize," Dorian said, his demeanor remaining composed yet authoritative. "Has Linda Kramer been informed that I am awaiting her?" Melissa exhaled rapidly, as if she had been abruptly interrupted in the midst of a thought. She did not even make eye contact as she touched the keyboard in front of her. "She is aware. She is currently concluding her work with another client." He awaited a response, perhaps an acknowledgement that she would check back, or an updated time. She, however, returned to her typing duties. "Do you have an estimate on when she'll be available?" His frustration was suppressed as he inquired. Before offering a shrug, Melissa scarcely glanced at the screen. It should not take much longer. Dorian steadied himself by steadily exhaling. What she said was not the only factor, it was also the manner in which she delivered it. There is no need for urgency. There was no genuine endeavor to verify. This is yet another response that is intended to be disregarded in order to appease him. Afterward, he observed it occur once more in his presence. A woman in a navy blue dress entered the room, her designer handbag swaying at her side. She was engaged in a conversation on the phone, her voice evoking a relaxed and carefree quality. The posture of Melissa was immediately altered. Her voice became more empathetic. Her lips curled into a form that bore a striking resemblance to a genuine smile. Her voice was more refined and lighter as she greeted Mrs. Lancaster. "Good morning." A young banker appeared at the woman's side, ushering her towards the back offices, and she scarcely had time to pause after giving a polite nod. "There is no delay. There are no inquiries. There will be no imminent announcement." Dorian exhaled slowly. He had been present for nearly an hour. She had been present for less than 1 minute. He returned to Melissa. "Do appointments hold any significance in this context, or is it strictly a matter of first come, first served?" She appeared somewhat uneasy for the first time. "I informed you, sir, that she will be with you shortly." It was once more present. "It is that term. Very soon." A postponement that lacks a specific deadline. An assurance that is not binding. A term that enabled individuals to feign ignorance regarding their actions. Dorian's gaze returned to the opaque glass doors. It would be simple to disregard the situation, to sit down, wait an additional 30 minutes, and pretend that it did not exist. However, this was not solely about the act of waiting. It was wholly unrelated. Dorian resumed his seat, endeavoring to maintain his composure. He had encountered more severe circumstances. He had established a company from the ground up, interacted with investors who were condescending, and been undervalued in rooms full of men who believed they were more knowledgeable. However, what about this? This was distinct. This was not about his business plan or the figures on a spreadsheet. This pertains to being overlooked. Regarding dismissal. As if he were not even worthy of an update. He examined his timepiece. 12:05 p.m. more than an hour. He drew a deliberate breath and once more surveyed the lobby. There was no one else in queue. Each individual who had entered subsequent to him had been acknowledged or let inside. With the exception of him. An older man in khakis was conversing with a youthful teller who was located across the room. Additionally, a golf polo. There was a relaxed, informal atmosphere to their conversation. Dorian listened with his head inclined. The older man replied with a chuckle, "Yes, I instructed her to enter by herself. She doesn't even need an appointment. You know how it is." The teller chuckled. "Well, for Mrs. Lancaster, we always make exceptions." Dorian's grasp tightened around the handle of his briefcase. So that was how it worked, rules for some, different rules for others. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees and gazing at the polished floors. This was an exercise. Would he sit silently, accept being pushed aside, and wait for permission to be seen? Alternatively, would he explicitly assert that his time was equally valuable as that of any other individual? He stood, not in a hurry, nor in an aggressive manner, but with a firm resolve. He proceeded directly to the opaque glass doors, disregarding Melissa's expressionless face and the front desk. Melissa initiated the sentence, "Sir," but he did not pause. He opened the door by pushing it. A hallway that was lined with private offices extended out in front of him. Some doors were left open, while others were closed. However, it was immediately apparent that Linda Kramer was not present at the meeting. She was seated at her workstation, utilizing her laptop to type. Isolated. In a single instant, her expression transitioned from surprise to irritation as she glanced up. She addressed him as Mr. Bennett, her voice becoming increasingly strained. "You should have waited to be called." Her gaze was met by Dorian with equal intensity. "I did wait." Her lips pressed into a thin line as her fingertips hovered over the keyboard. She ultimately said, "Please, take a seat." Dorian sat not because she had permitted him to, but because he opted to do so. However, he was aware that this conversation would not unfold as she had anticipated. Linda's visage was meticulously neutral as she adjusted the papers on her desk, her fingers twitching slightly. However, Dorian was able to perceive it, the slight tension in her jaw and the flicker of irritation in her irises. "I apologize for the delay," she stated, attempting to maintain a smile. "We've been extremely busy today." Busy. Dorian allowed the word to remain in the air for a brief period. While he remained in the lobby for more than an hour and a half, he observed at least 6 individuals being escorted past him in a manner that befitted a VIP. "Were you?" he inquired, maintaining a composed yet assertive demeanor. "Because I counted a few clients who didn't have to wait at all. Some without appointments." Linda's lips were drawn together in a narrow line. "I assure you, Mr. Bennett, that wasn't intentional. There must have been a miscommunication." "Right. A miscommunication." Dorian maintained an unreadable expression as he exhaled through his nostrils. "Interesting." Linda's eagerness to progress beyond the conversation was evident as she cleared her throat. She opened a folder and examined its contents. "Now, let's discuss your loan application," she said, her voice regaining its polished, dismissive quality. "I've had a chance to review it, and while your finances are impressive, we do have strict criteria for approvals. Given the current lending climate, I'm afraid we'll need more assurances before we can proceed." The door swung open just as she completed her sentence. The energy in the room underwent an immediate transformation. The hallway, which had been tranquil moments prior, was abruptly reverberated with a low murmur of voices, and not just any voices. These were substantial. 3 men entered the building, each wearing a custom-tailored suit, and their authority was immediately apparent. Dorian was not required to infer their identities. These were the individuals who were truly significant at this bank, the executives and decision-makers. The type of males for whom approval was of paramount importance in a setting such as this. Richard Langford, the CEO of Highland Crest Bank, was present at the forefront of the group. Langford was well acquainted with Dorian. Richard's acute eyes scrutinized the room before settling on Dorian. His countenance was illuminated by recognition. "Dorian," he exclaimed, his face erupting into a smile. "What the hell are you doing here?" Linda experienced a state of paralysis. Dorian stood, firmly shaking Richard's hand. "Hey, Richard. Been a while." "It has." Richard applauded him on the shoulder. "You still running Bennett's strategies?" "I am still cultivating it," Dorian replied with ease. Linda's fingers clenched around the folder in front of her as she gazed between them. Richard's uncomplicated smile dissipated as he gazed at her. "How long has Dorian been waiting?" Silence. Linda's mouth was agape, but she was unable to articulate any words. Dorian did not respond immediately. He allowed it to remain, allowing the weight of it to settle over her, and the entire room. "About an hour and a half," he finally admitted. Dorian observed Richard's jaw slightly twitching, although his expression did not undergo any significant changes. "An hour and a half," Richard reiterated, his demeanor deceptively light. "You had Dorian Bennett waiting for an hour and a half." Linda was at a loss for words. There was a scheduling issue. Richard did not even glance at her. However, his focus was still on Dorian. "You should have called me directly," he asserted. "I would have made sure you were taken care of." Dorian smiled with a small, knowing grin. "Didn't think I needed to." Richard exhaled and shook his head. His smile had vanished by the time he turned to Linda. "Linda," he said, his voice calm but final, "step outside for a moment." Linda's face was now a shade paler than before, her hands tightening into fists before she unclenched them. "Of course," she said, standing quickly and exiting without another word. The moment the door clicked shut, Richard turned back to Dorian, shaking his head again. "I don't know what happened," he said, "but I guarantee it won't happen again." Dorian didn't say anything right away. He didn't need to, because the damage had already been done. The door clicked shut behind Linda, but the tension in the room lingered. Richard let out a slow breath, shaking his head as he took a seat across from Dorian. The other 2 executives stood nearby, exchanging glances but saying nothing. "This isn't how we do things here," Richard said finally, his tone steady but clipped. Dorian tilted his head slightly. "Seems like it is." Richard let that sit for a second. He didn't argue. He didn't try to make excuses. Because men like him, men who resided at the top, knew when something had gone wrong. And right now, he was calculating precisely how big of a problem this was. Dorian wasn't just some walk-in patron. He had built a multi-million-dollar consulting firm from the ground up. His reputation carried weight in business circles. He knew people who trusted his word. And now he had a story. Richard sat back in his chair, steepling his fingertips. "Tell me what happened." Dorian didn't sugarcoat it. He told him everything, the appointment, the wait, watching others get taken in before him. He told him about Melissa's dismissive attitude, Linda's indifference, the way she tried to brush him off like he was just another name on a list. Richard didn't interrupt. The other 2 executives listened just as intently. When Dorian finished, the silence stretched for a moment. Richard then inhaled. "I appreciate you telling me," he indicated, "and I'll be honest, I'm pissed." Dorian's posture was slightly slouched. "Why?" Richard's giggle was brief and devoid of humor. "Because this is the kind of thing that wrecks reputations. We've worked too damn hard to build this institution's credibility, and now I have to clean up a mess I didn't even know existed." One of the executives was the one to whom he turned. "Make sure Linda is off the floor immediately. We'll have a conversation later." The man nodded and stepped out without another word. Richard turned back to Dorian. "That loan application you submitted, I assume it was solid?" Dorian tapped his briefcase. "See for yourself." Richard took the folder and flipped through it. He barely made it through the first few pages before shaking his head. This shouldn't have even been a question. Another glimpse at one of the remaining executives. Fast track it. I want an approval on my desk by the end of the day. Dorian raised an eyebrow. Just like that? Richard met his gaze. You should have had it 2 hours ago. I'm fixing the mistake. Dorian took that into account. This was not a matter of benevolence. It was not a matter of rectifying the situation. It was a matter of control, damage, and ensuring that the narrative ceased in this office before it spread to areas that Richard did not wish for it to. Additionally, Dorian comprehended that game more effectively than any other individual. However, he was not about to allow Richard to off the hook so easily. I will accept the approval, Dorian stated, standing. However, resolving this for me does not resolve the underlying issue. Richard's expression didn't change, but something in his pupils flickered. We'll be having a long conversation about that, said the representative. Dorian reached for his briefcase and nodded once before proceeding towards the door. However, prior to departing, he ensured that he once again met Melissa's gaze. She didn't look nearly as confident now. Dorian's epidermis was oppressed by the summer heat as he emerged from his residence. The bank's exterior was immaculate and gleamed in the midday sun. However, the fractures had already developed within. This was not solely about obtaining a loan. It wasn't even just about Linda. It was about a more significant matter. A scenario that had transpired in a multitude of locations and in a multitude of ways. Loudness was not consistently present. It was not always explicit. Even so, it was present. The presumption that certain individuals were entitled to those offices, while others were required to wait. The discreet dismissals. The rejections that are courteous. The meticulously erected barriers that could always be rationalized. However, not today. Today, an individual was required to confront the repercussions. Linda Kramer would reconsider the name on her appointment list the next time she viewed it. Dorian examined his smartphone. A new email has been received. The loan has been approved. He smirked and tucked it into his pocket as he walked towards his car. Respect isn't bestowed. It's demanded. And today, he got what he came for. If you've ever been in a situation like this, if you've ever been made to feel like your time, your presence, your business wasn't valued, speak up. Please refrain from waiting for authorization. Assume your position at the table. Additionally, what if they attempt to prolong your wait? Guarantee that they keep in mind the reason for the error.